I have nothing to cover myself, said the Apache woman from behind the water. The sun had just begun to rise over the Apache reservation, painting the sky with soft shades of pink and gold. The air was crisp, and the river that wound through the land glimmered like liquid silver. The young rancher, named Daniel, had left his small cabin earlier than usual. He was used to working alone, tending to his horses and checking fences, but today he had decided to visit the reservation to deliver supplies, blankets, food, and fresh water. It was a small act, but Daniel liked to help whenever he could, even if it wasn't asked for. He rode along the dusty path that followed the riverbank, enjoying the quiet. Birds sang softly from the trees, and the wind whispered through the branches. Daniel's eyes were scanning the river, not because he expected anything unusual, but because he liked to notice life. Every detail of the land felt alive to him. The way the water rippled over smooth stones, the way the tall grass swayed, and the distant mountains standing like silent guards. As he reached a bend in the river, a sound caught his attention. It was faint at first, almost blending with the soft rush of the water. But it was there, a soft cry, trembling and uncertain. Daniel slowed his horse, listening carefully. The sound was human. He frowned and leaned forward in his saddle, peering through the early morning mist. By the river, half hidden by the tall reeds and shadows, he saw a figure, a woman, small and fragile, struggling in the shallow water. She seemed unsure of where to step, slipping on the smooth stones, her movements awkward and desperate. Daniel's heart tightened. She was trying to cover herself with a small torn piece of cloth, but it was too little to protect her. Her long dark hair was wet and plastered against her face, and her eyes were wide with fear. "I have nothing to cover myself," she said softly, her voice trembling. Daniel stopped his horse a safe distance away. He could see her clearly now, and his heart went out to her. She wasn't just wet and cold. She looked terrified and exposed in every way. He swallowed hard, unsure how to approach. The situation was delicate. He had to help, but he couldn't make her feel more frightened or ashamed. Daniel gently spoke, keeping his voice low and calm. "I'm not going to hurt you," he said. "Are you okay?" The woman glanced up, startled. Her eyes were wary, and for a moment she considered running further into the reeds. But the exhaustion in her body was clear. She had no energy to fight or flee. Finally, she nodded slightly, still clutching her tiny cloth around herself. Her trust was hesitant, like the first leaf of spring breaking through ice. Daniel dismounted slowly, keeping his hands visible. He moved toward her in small steps, careful not to make sudden movements. "I have a jacket," he said softly. "If you want, I can give it to you to cover yourself." For a long moment, she didn't answer. Her eyes studied him, searching for any hint of harm. Then, slowly, she nodded again. Relief washed over Daniel. He reached into his saddlebag and pulled out his worn brown jacket. It had been his father's once, and it smelled faintly of leather and campfire smoke. He offered it to her without stepping too close. She took the jacket with trembling hands, her fingers brushing his for a brief moment. Daniel stepped back, giving her space. She wrapped it around herself as best she could. It was too large, nearly swallowing her small frame, but it offered some protection and warmth. For the first time, she relaxed just a little, sinking onto a nearby rock. Daniel crouched a few feet away, careful not to invade her space. "Are you hurt?" he asked. She shook her head. "No, just cold," she whispered. Her voice was quiet but steady now. Daniel noticed the dirt and scratches on her arms and legs, evidence that she had been struggling along the riverbank for some time. He felt a surge of determination to help her. "Can you stand?" he asked gently. "I can help you get out of the water." Ken hesitated, glancing down at the slippery stones. I don't know," she admitted. "I've never been here alone." Daniel nodded, understanding her fear. "Then we'll go slowly," he said. "I'll stay right here. Just take my hand when you're ready." The woman looked at him for a long moment, as if measuring his honesty. Then, with a deep breath, she reached out. Daniel grasped her hand firmly but gently, guiding her toward solid ground. She slipped a little, but he steadied her. Step by step she moved, her trust growing with each careful motion. Once she was safely on the riverbank, she sank to her knees and hugged the jacket around herself. Daniel stood nearby, keeping his distance, unsure what to do next. He could see her shivering, but he didn't want to overwhelm her with words or questions. After a few moments of silence, she spoke again, her voice barely above the wind. I lost everything. My home, the flood, it took it all. Daniel's heart ached for her. He had heard about the recent flood that had damaged parts of the reservation, destroying homes and belongings. He had not realized the full extent of its impact, but now he could see it in the fear and exhaustion etched on this woman's face. I'm sorry, he said sincerely. I didn't know, but you're safe here now. She nodded, tears brimming in her eyes. Thank you, she whispered. I don't know what I would have done without someone like you. Daniel felt a lump in his throat. It was rare for him to feel so deeply connected to someone he had just met, but something about her vulnerability and courage touched him. He knew he couldn't leave her alone, not in this state. Let's find a place where you can rest, he suggested. There's a small shelter nearby. It's not much, but it's dry and safe. She hesitated, glancing back at the river, as if drawn to its familiar sound. I don't want to be a burden, she said softly. You're not a burden, Daniel replied firmly. No one should ever feel like a burden when they need help. After a few moments, she agreed. With Daniel's guidance, she rose slowly, still wrapped in his oversized jacket. He stayed by her side, walking carefully across the uneven ground. The river's edge glistened in the morning light, and the tall reeds swayed gently as if watching over them. As they walked, Daniel noticed the strength in her movements. Despite her fear and exhaustion, there was a quiet determination in the way she kept going. It struck him that her courage was not loud or aggressive, but steady and enduring, like the river itself. When they reached the small shelter, Daniel helped her inside. It was simple, a wooden structure with a roof and a few blankets, but it offered warmth and privacy. She sank onto the blankets, wrapping the jacket tightly around herself. Rest here for a while, Daniel said softly. I'll be nearby if you need anything. She nodded, her eyes heavy, but grateful. Thank you, she whispered again. I don't know how to repay you. Just take care of yourself, Daniel replied with a small smile. That's enough. As he stepped outside, he looked back at her, feeling a mixture of relief and concern. The river continued to flow, the sun climbing higher in the sky. Daniel knew that her story was far from over, and he had no idea what challenges lay ahead for her. But for now, she was safe, and that was enough. The wind rustled through the trees, carrying the sound of water and the faint cry of a bird. Daniel mounted his horse, glancing back one last time. The woman was resting now, her small figure wrapped in the jacket, her eyes closed. He felt a quiet sense of hope. Despite the hardships and the fear, there was a beginning here, a moment of trust, a moment of human kindness. And in that fragile, early morning light, Daniel realized something important. Sometimes helping someone was not about grand gestures or words. It was about presence, patience, and the courage to reach out when someone needed it most. The river flowed on, steady and unending, carrying with it the promise of another day, another chance to do what was right. The morning had grown warmer, but the air still carried the freshness of the river and the earth. Inside the small shelter, the Apache woman, wrapped tightly in the rancher's oversized jacket, sat quietly. Her dark hair hung damp over her shoulders, and her eyes, still wary, followed every movement Daniel made as he carefully placed a few blankets and a small bundle of dry clothes nearby. He kept his tone soft and calm. You should change into these clothes when you feel ready, he said. They're clean, and they'll help you feel warmer. The woman looked down at the folded garments, unsure. Her hands trembled slightly as she reached for them, then paused. I don't know how to, she began, but stopped herself. You don't have to hurry, Daniel reassured her. Take your time. No one is rushing you. She nodded. a small gesture, but it carried a quiet trust. Daniel noticed it and felt a mix of relief and responsibility. He knew that every word, every gesture mattered. She had already suffered so much, and now every action he took needed to respect her dignity. For a while there was silence, broken only by the faint sound of the river outside and the soft creak of the wooden shelter. Finally she spoke again, her voice low and careful. I didn't expect anyone to help me." Daniel crouched slightly to be at her eye level, though still keeping a respectful distance. "Sometimes help comes from unexpected places," he said. "You're not alone here." She gave a small, almost shy smile. "I've been alone for a long time," she admitted. Her voice was soft, carrying the weight of past hardships. Daniel realized that the flood had not only taken her home, but also left her without support. Her strength was remarkable, but it had been forged through isolation and struggle. "Tell me your name," Daniel said gently. "I don't even know how to call you." She hesitated, then finally whispered, "Ahioka." Daniel repeated it quietly, letting the sound of her name settle in the small space. "Ahioka, it's a beautiful name." She nodded, and for a moment her eyes softened. The tension in her shoulders eased slightly, and Daniel felt a flicker of hope. Perhaps in this quiet shelter, trust could grow.
"I'll stay here for a while," Daniel said.
"Just to make sure you're okay. Then I have to return to my ranch, but I'll come back later with more supplies." You don't have to," she said. "I can manage." "I want to," Daniel replied firmly but kindly. "You've been through enough already. You shouldn't have to do this alone." There was another pause, filled only by the soft whisper of the river. Then she nodded slowly, the first clear sign that she accepted his presence without fear. After a few minutes she finally gathered the courage to change into the clean clothes Daniel had brought. He turned slightly, giving her space while keeping his voice gentle. "I'll be right over here," he said. "Just call me if you need help." She nodded, carefully slipping into the garments. The simple clothes were plain, but they were clean and warm, a stark contrast to the torn and wet cloth she had clung to earlier. When she was finished, she sat back down, hugging her knees to her chest, still wrapped in Daniel's jacket for comfort. "You've been strong," Daniel said quietly. "Not many people could survive what you've been through." Ahioka looked down at her hands, and a faint blush colored her cheeks. "I didn't feel strong," she admitted. "I felt scared, lost, alone." Daniel smiled softly. "Strength isn't about never being scared. It's about moving forward even when you are." Her eyes met his, and for the first time, there was a spark of connection. Daniel realized that this woman, despite her fear, had endured more than most could imagine. She had survived alone, with courage that was quiet but unyielding. As the day went on, Daniel and Ahioka began to share small pieces of their lives. Daniel spoke about his ranch, his family, and the simple routines that had kept him grounded. He didn't share too much at once, careful not to overwhelm her, but enough to let her see that he was trustworthy. Ahioka, in turn, shared fragments of her past. She spoke of her home before the flood, of the land her ancestors had cared for, and the river that had always been a part of her life. She didn't go into all the painful details yet, but Daniel could sense the depth of loss beneath her words. Each memory carried both beauty and sorrow, and he listened with quiet respect. As the sun climbed higher, the air grew warmer, and Daniel offered her some water and a simple meal he had brought along. She ate slowly, her movements cautious, but there was a sense of relief in the way she accepted nourishment. The simple act of sharing food became a bridge between them, a small gesture of trust and safety. For the first time since the flood, Ahioka felt a moment of peace. She still worried about what would come next, about how she would rebuild her life. But in this quiet shelter with Daniel nearby, she felt a small measure of hope. Daniel, too, felt something shift within him. He had always seen himself as a helper, someone who did what he could for others. But in this moment he realized that helping Ahioka was also changing him. He was learning patience, empathy, and the quiet power of human connection. As the afternoon sun moved across the sky, Daniel noticed the sky beginning to cloud over slightly. Darker clouds rolled in from the mountains, and the wind picked up, rustling the trees and sending ripples across the river. He glanced at Ahioka, who had wrapped herself more tightly in the jacket. "We might get rain soon," he said gently. "We should make sure you're comfortable and dry." Ahioka nodded, her eyes reflecting both concern and trust. I don't want to go back outside," she admitted softly. "You don't have to," Daniel said. "We'll stay here until the storm passes." As the first drops of rain began to fall, they listened to the gentle patter on the roof of the shelter. The sound was soothing, almost like a lullaby, and for a while neither spoke. They simply shared the quiet together, two people brought together by circumstance, each offering the other a measure of safety and understanding. After a while, Ahioka spoke again, her voice quieter now. I haven't had anyone care for me like this in a long time," she said. "I didn't think anyone would." "You deserve care," he said simply. "Everyone does. And right now, you have it. You're not alone anymore." She gave a small smile, the first genuine one he had seen. It was fragile but real, and Daniel felt a warmth spread through him. He realized that this moment, small as it seemed, was important. It was the beginning of something new, a foundation built on trust and human kindness. The storm grew heavier, rain drumming steadily on the roof, but inside the shelter, there was a sense of calm. Daniel found himself watching her, noticing how, even in her vulnerability, there was resilience. She had faced so much and survived. Now, with just a little help, she could begin to heal. As evening approached, Daniel prepared a small space for Ahioka to rest. He laid out the blankets, making sure she would be comfortable, and offered her one more reassuring smile. "Try to sleep," he said softly. "Tomorrow is a new day, and we'll figure things out together." She nodded, pulling the jacket closer around her and settling onto the blankets. Her eyes closed, and after a few moments, she drifted into a light, peaceful sleep. Daniel watched over her for a while, ensuring she was safe, then stepped outside the shelter. The rain had slowed to a gentle drizzle, and the river sparkled under the fading light of the sun. As he looked back at the shelter, Daniel felt a deep sense of responsibility and a quiet hope. The day had been difficult, but it had also been meaningful. He had met someone in need and had been able to help, but more importantly, he had begun to form a bond built on trust, respect, and human kindness. And for Ahioka, the small shelter by the river, the warmth of clean clothes, and the presence of someone who cared, even a little, offered a flicker of hope she hadn't felt in weeks. She was no longer alone in the world. Someone had seen her, respected her, and helped her without judgment. And in that simple act, the beginning of a new story had begun. The rain continued through the night, a quiet rhythm that spoke of renewal and cleansing. And in that rhythm, two lives, once separate, were slowly being connected by trust, care, and the gentle understanding that sometimes, even in the darkest moments, human kindness could light the way. The next morning, the sun rose slowly over the Apache reservation, casting a warm golden light across the river and the tall grass. Daniel woke early, as he usually did, to check the surroundings and make sure everything was safe. When he looked toward the small shelter, he saw Ahioka sitting quietly on the blankets, wrapped in the jacket he had lent her. Her eyes were open, thoughtful, and alert, watching the river as if it held a message only she could understand. Daniel approached slowly, careful not to startle her. "Good morning," he said softly. "Did you sleep okay?" Ahioka turned her gaze toward him and nodded. "I slept enough," she replied. "Thank you."
He smiled gently.
"You're welcome. I'm glad you got some rest." There was a brief silence, broken only by the sound of birds and the rustling leaves. Daniel noticed how cautious she still was, how every small movement seemed measured. He understood that her trust was not given easily. It had to be earned, and he was determined to do so, step by step. After a moment, Daniel said, "I brought some more supplies, food, water, and a few blankets. I thought it might help you feel more comfortable while you stay here." Ahioka looked at the bundle and her eyes softened slightly. She didn't reach for it immediately but nodded in acknowledgement. "Thank you," she said quietly. I don't know how I would manage without your help." "You don't have to manage alone," Daniel said gently. "You don't have to face everything by yourself." She looked down at her hands, twisting the jacket's fabric nervously. "I've been alone for so long," she admitted. "I'm not used to people helping me. I've learned to rely only on myself." Daniel crouched slightly, keeping his voice calm and steady. "I understand," he said. "It's not easy to trust someone after everything you've been through. But right now, you can rely on me. I'll help you however I can." She lifted her eyes to his, and for the first time, there was a hint of relief in her gaze. It was quiet and tentative, but it was there. I want to trust," she whispered, "but it's hard. And that's okay. You can take your time. I'm not going anywhere." The morning passed quietly. Daniel helped her prepare a small breakfast of bread, fruit, and water. They ate slowly, and the simple act of sharing food began to create a bridge between them. As they ate, Daniel asked gentle questions about her life, careful not to push too hard. Ahioka spoke of her home before the flood, describing the small adobe house she had grown up in, the garden her mother had tended, and the river that had always been a part of her life. Her words were soft, tinged with both sadness and fondness. Daniel listened intently, realizing that she was sharing not just memories, but pieces of her heart. "You have a deep connection to this land," he said quietly. "It's clear that it's a part of who you are." She nodded, her eyes misting slightly. "I feel lost without it," she admitted. "The flood, it took more than my home. It took the sense of belonging I had. Everything familiar is gone." Daniel felt a pang of sorrow. He had seen the destruction caused by natural disasters before, but hearing her speak made it real in a way statistics never could. He wanted to comfort her, but he knew words alone were not enough. Actions mattered more. "I'll help you get through this," he said firmly. "Step by step, we'll find a way to make things better, even if it takes time." Ahioka looked at him, and for a moment her expression softened completely. "Thank you," she whispered. You're the first person in a long time who hasn't judged me or expected me to be strong all the time." Daniel smiled gently. "You don't have to be strong all the time. It's okay to let someone help you." The conversation was interrupted by a sudden rustling in the bushes outside the shelter. Both Daniel and Ahioka froze, listening carefully. The sound came again, closer this time, and it was unmistakably that of movement, footsteps on the damp earth. Daniel's hand instinctively went to the small bag at his side, checking for a first aid kit and a flashlight. Ahioka's eyes widened, and she clutched the jacket tighter around herself. What is that?" she whispered. Daniel shook his head slightly. "I don't know yet," he said calmly. "Stay here. I'll check." He stepped outside slowly, careful to make no sudden movements. The wind carried the sound of the river and the rustling leaves, masking some of the noise, but he could still hear it, a steady approach, deliberate and cautious. Daniel scanned the area, his eyes sharp. Then he saw it, a small group of deer moving quickly through the trees. They were startled, fleeing from something else, but whatever it was, it hadn't noticed him yet. He breathed a sigh of relief. "Just animals," he murmured to himself. Then he turned back toward the shelter. "It's okay," he called gently. "Nothing dangerous, just deer." Ahioka exhaled slowly, her shoulders relaxing slightly. I thought it was something worse," she admitted. Daniel smiled reassuringly. "It's normal to feel afraid," he said, "especially when you've been through so much. Your instincts are still strong, and that's a good thing. It keeps you safe." As the day wore on, Daniel and Ahioka continued to talk quietly. He taught her a few small tasks to help organize the shelter and make it more comfortable. A skill she hadn't needed in a long time, but one she quickly remembered. The simple tasks helped her feel useful and gave her a sense of control over her surroundings. By afternoon, the sky had cleared, and the sunlight poured through the trees, casting a warm glow over the river and the shelter. Daniel suggested a short walk along the riverbank, hoping the fresh air and gentle movement would help Ayoka regain some strength and confidence. She hesitated, unsure of venturing outside, but with his calm encouragement she agreed. They walked slowly, the soft grass cushioning their steps. Ayoka's eyes were drawn to the river, and for a long moment she simply watched the water flowing steadily. "It's beautiful," she murmured. "Even after all that's happened, it still moves forward." Daniel nodded. "Life is like that river," he said. "It keeps moving, no matter what obstacles it faces. And sometimes we have to learn to move with it, not against it." She looked at him thoughtfully. "I've spent so long resisting, holding on to what I lost. Maybe I need to learn to move forward too." Daniel smiled gently. "That's all any of us can do. One step at a time." As they continued along the river, Daniel noticed her starting to relax. Her steps were steadier, her posture more open. The tension that had been so visible when he first found her was slowly easing, replaced by cautious hope. Suddenly, Ayoka stopped and pointed toward the distant tree line. "Look," she said softly. "Do you see that?" Daniel followed her gaze and saw a faint movement, a figure standing at the edge of the forest. It was hard to make out clearly, but there was something familiar about the stance. Ayoka's expression changed, a mix of recognition and concern. That's someone from my community," she whispered. I think they're looking for me." Daniel nodded, his mind alert. "Do you want me to stay with you while we see who it is?" She hesitated, then nodded. "Yes," she said. I'm not ready to face them alone." Together, they moved closer, keeping a cautious distance. As they approached, the figure became clearer, a young man carrying a small bundle, looking around anxiously. When he finally noticed Ayoka, relief washed over his face. He ran toward her and she stepped forward slowly, unsure how to react. The man stopped a few feet away, speaking quickly in a mixture of relief and urgency. "Ayoka!
Are you okay? We've been looking everywhere for you."
The flood, everyone was so worried. Ayoka's eyes filled with tears, and she looked at Daniel, her expression torn. I didn't know if anyone was looking for me," she whispered. Daniel gave her a reassuring smile. "It's okay," he said softly. "You're safe now. You don't have to face it alone." The man took her hand gently, his eyes full of concern. "You're safe," he repeated. "We'll get you back to the community. You're not alone." Ayoka looked back at Daniel, gratitude and hesitation in her eyes. "Thank you," she whispered, "for everything. I won't forget this." Daniel nodded, his heart full. "Take care of yourself," he said. "Remember, strength comes in many forms. Trust is one of them." As Ayoka followed the young man toward the distant community, Daniel watched her go. The river flowed steadily beside him, carrying with it the quiet reminder that life moved forward, even after fear and loss. He knew she had a long journey ahead, but for now she was safe, and that was enough. The sun dipped lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the land. Daniel turned back toward his own path, feeling a deep sense of fulfillment. In helping Ayoka, he had witnessed courage, resilience, and the quiet power of human kindness. And though their paths would soon diverge, the connection they had formed would linger, a reminder that even in the darkest times, trust and compassion could light the way. The sun was low in the sky, casting long shadows over the Apache reservation. The river shimmered in gold and orange, reflecting the soft light as it flowed steadily past the trees. Ayoka walked slowly with the young man from her community, her hand resting lightly in his. Every step felt heavier than the last, not because she was tired, but because she carried so much in her heart. She thought of the past few days, the flood, her struggle by the river, and most of all the quiet, steadfast kindness of Daniel. Her thoughts wandered to the small shelter by the river where she had first found safety. She remembered the warmth of the blankets, the soft words he had spoken, and the gentle way he had guided her. For the first time since the flood, she had felt a sense of calm, a sense of protection. She realized she had been carrying fear and grief for so long that she had almost forgotten what it felt like to be cared for without judgment. Daniel walked a few steps behind them, giving them space but keeping a careful watch. He could see that Ayoka was struggling with her emotions. She wanted to return to her community, yet she seemed hesitant, unsure if she truly belonged there anymore. He knew this was natural. After experiencing trauma and isolation, the thought of rejoining familiar faces could bring both comfort and anxiety. When they reached the edge of the community, people began to gather. Families came out of their homes, children paused in the streets, and neighbors stepped forward with concern and relief. Everyone seemed to have heard about the flood and its aftermath, and they were eager to know that Ayoka was safe. Ayoka froze for a moment, unsure of how to approach. Her hand tightened slightly around the young man's arm. She could feel the weight of their gaze and the anticipation of questions, advice, and perhaps judgment. Daniel noticed her hesitation and stepped closer, offering a reassuring smile. "You don't have to go in alone," he said softly. "Take your time, remember you're safe." She nodded slowly, drawing a deep breath. Then, with a small, determined step, she walked forward into the circle of her community. The relief on their faces was clear. People spoke gently, asking questions about her safety, offering water, and sharing what little they had managed to save after the flood. Ayoka responded with quiet, polite words, her eyes flicking to Daniel every now and then, as if seeking the strength she had found in him. One of the elders, a woman with silver hair and kind eyes, stepped forward. "Ayoka," she said, her voice calm and steady. "We were so worried about you." "We heard about the flood. Are you hurt? Are you well?" Ayoka shook her head. "I'm okay now," she said softly. "Thank you for worrying. I found help along the river." The elder's eyes softened with understanding. "Sometimes help comes from unexpected places," she said. "It's good that someone was there for you." Ayoka looked around and realized just how much the community cared for her, even though she had felt alone. And yet, she also understood that she had grown in her own strength over these past days. The kindness Daniel had shown her had reminded her that she could trust again, that she could accept help without feeling weak. Daniel watched the interactions quietly, then decided it was time to speak. He approached Ayoka gently, careful to show respect for her space and culture. "It's time to go back to your home," he said softly. "I'll be leaving now, but I wanted to make sure you were safe first." Ayoka turned toward him, her eyes full of gratitude and emotion. I don't know how to thank you," she whispered. "You saved me, not just from the river, but from feeling completely alone." "You don't need to thank me," he said. "Just remember what you've learned these past days. You're stronger than you realize, and it's okay to accept help when you need it. That's a kind of courage, too." Tears gathered in Ayoka's eyes. She reached out and gave him a brief, heartfelt hug. A simple gesture of connection that spoke louder than words ever could. Daniel felt the sincerity and depth of her gratitude, and it left a quiet warmth in his chest. The young man who had been accompanying her stepped forward. "We'll make sure she's safe now," he said gently. Daniel nodded, trusting them to care for her. He knew that his role had been temporary, a bridge until Ayoka could find her footing again, and he was satisfied, knowing she had regained enough confidence and trust to face the next chapter of her life. As Daniel began to walk away, he looked back one last time. Ayoka stood among her community, the jacket he had given her wrapped around her shoulders. Her posture was more upright, her gaze steady. He realized that she was no longer the frightened, vulnerable woman he had found by the river. She was someone who had survived fear, hardship, and isolation, and had come out the other side with renewed strength and dignity. The sun was setting now, the sky painted in brilliant shades of orange, pink, and purple. Daniel felt a sense of peace as he walked back along the river, reflecting on the days that had passed. He thought about how fragile trust could be, and yet how transformative it was when it was given and received with care. He also thought about Ahioka's courage, how someone could be vulnerable and strong at the same time, and how both qualities were essential to survival and growth. Meanwhile, Ahioka moved among her people, sharing small smiles and brief words of gratitude. She felt a quiet confidence returning to her step, a sense that she was part of something again. She knew the journey to fully heal and rebuild would take time, but the support of her community and the memory of Daniel's kindness gave her hope. She realized that asking for help didn't make her weak, it made her human. That evening, as the community gathered around small fires and children played near the river, Ahioka reflected on the events of the past days. She remembered the fear she had felt in the water, the loneliness that had weighed on her heart, and the warmth of the shelter where Daniel had given her both protection and respect. She realized that those moments of connection had strengthened her in ways she hadn't expected. Daniel, on the other hand, returned to his ranch, the sound of the river fading behind him. He felt changed too. Helping Ahioka had reminded him of the importance of empathy, patience, and simple acts of kindness. It had shown him that courage wasn't always about facing danger directly. It could also be about reaching out to someone who is afraid and standing beside them until they regain their strength. Days turned into weeks, and Ahioka slowly reintegrated into her community. She helped rebuild homes, assisted in restoring gardens, and shared her story with others who had faced hardships. She found that the lessons she had learned by the river, trust, patience, resilience, were now part of her daily life. And though Daniel was no longer physically present, his influence remained. Every act of kindness she received reminded her of the quiet man who had guided her to safety without judgment. One evening, as she sat near the riverbank watching the water flow and listening to the rustle of the leaves, Ahioka felt a profound sense of gratitude. She thought about the moments of fear, the moments of doubt, and the moments of connection that had carried her through. She realized that life, like the river, moved forward constantly, and that she, too, had the power to move forward, even after loss. Her community had grown stronger too, not just in rebuilding homes, but in their bonds with one another. The experience had reminded them of the importance of looking out for each other, of offering help without expectation, and of trusting in the resilience of the human spirit. As night fell and stars began to appear in the sky, Ahioka looked up and whispered a quiet, "Thank you," not just to Daniel, but to the universe, to the river, and to the lessons she had learned. She knew that challenges would come again, as they always did, but she also knew that she had the strength, courage, and support to face them. Daniel, back at his ranch, looked up at the same night sky. He thought of Ahioka, safe and stronger now, and felt a quiet satisfaction. The world was vast, filled with hardships and beauty alike, and sometimes all it took was one act of kindness to change the course of someone's life. And so the story ended not with grand triumph or dramatic spectacle, but with quiet understanding, hope, and human connection. Ahioka had found safety, trust, and courage, and Daniel had witnessed the power of compassion and patience. The river continued to flow, steady and enduring, carrying both of their stories forward. Reminders that in moments of fear and uncertainty, kindness and trust could light the path ahead. The next morning, the river glimmered once again in the soft light of dawn. Ahioka walked along its edge, feeling the cool water against her fingertips. She thought about the days that had passed, the fear she had faced, and the hands that had reached out to help her. A sense of peace settled over her. She was not the same person who had been lost and alone by the water. She was stronger, braver, and ready to embrace the future, one step at a time. Daniel, in the distance, watched the river from his ranch, knowing that sometimes the greatest victories were quiet and unseen. He smiled, feeling grateful that he could play a part, however small, in the story of someone finding hope again. And with the gentle flow of the river and the quiet strength of human kindness, their stories, though separate, remained connected forever.